sometimes I don't know if people realize just how rapidly the world's changing. We hear a lot about the power of disruptive technology to upend more traditional business models in the industry after industry. But we don't always put the pieces together in terms of what that means for both companies and individuals, maybe even for you. That's why tonight we're speaking with Frits Van Paasschen. Frits is the former CEO of Starwood. That's probably how maybe you remember him, 2007, 2015, because he's a longtime guest on the show. Before that, he spent 3 years as CEO of Coors Brewing Company. And before that, he worked for Nike, where he ultimately ended up in charge of their business in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. What a brand guy this guy is. We got to talk about that. When Frits was running Starwood, he got a chance to see the results of disruptive innovation up close and personal all over the globe, which led him to write a terrific new book. I typically don't have authors on this one. You got to read. This is Disruptor's Feast, How to Avoid Being Devoured in Today's Rapidly Changing Global Economy. I loved it. I think he perfectly captures the zeitgeist of this era, where we're constantly being bludgeoned by all sorts of changes that many of us barely understand. So let's sit down with Frits, hear more about the important insights that he put in the Disruptor's Feast. Frits, good to see you, sir. Have a seat.
All right, thanks, Jim.
All right, how do I avoid being a carcass, which is my favorite subtitle of all the ones you have in this excellent book?
Look, I think the key here in looking at change is, how do you make sure you recognize what's happening? One of the things we all suffer from is something called cognitive bias. This idea that when we see things that are different, they're threatening, we back off.
Right.
What you have to do when you're a businessman, when you're a leader, or for that matter, when you're an investor, is understand where change is coming from and what it really means for you.
Well, but, here's a good example. You ran a great hotel chain. When I was growing up, what that meant is service, service, service. As long as you offered great service, it was good enough. No.
Service still matters in the hospitality business, of course, but what's changed is hotel companies have to compete by bringing guests to hotels. And when they do that, they become basically a digital platform business to deliver hospitality. And who are they competing against? The OTAs, the online travel agencies, right. Booking.com, Expedia, but also Airbnb. So they've got a whole new set of competitors they need to think about.
Even in the time that you were at Starwood, none of this existed when you started.
That's right.
How do you keep up with it? How do you read trade publications? You hear about the competition. How do you keep up and beat?
It's all of those things, right? You have to make sure that you surround yourself with different sources of information. One of the things I talk about in the book is the best decisions you make in business are when you have a group of people around the table with a shared goal, but with different perspectives. And that open conversation, that realization that things may be different somewhere else or coming from somewhere else, I think that's really the key.
Well, this morning, the president met with a group of CEOs who have a shared goal, which is for more prosperity. Are they capable in that kind of group to be able to give some feedback to the president who wants people to hire? Is that just too old style? Is that just not in keeping with what we learned in Disruptor's Feast?
I think there are some great ideas that could come out of that.
You do?
And I think the key is, look, with Donald Trump, love him or hate him, he's a great negotiator. I've done business with him.
You have? Tell me about it.
And the key is he'll posture, he'll do things, he'll position, he'll say things that forward his own objectives, right? That's what he does. The key is to separate his antics from his actions and focus on what he's going to try to do and what he wants to get. And in the end, if I had one thing to say to him, it would be this. We shouldn't just be thinking about getting old jobs back.
Right.
We should be thinking about how do we create new ones, right? I think the spirit of American business is not playing to avoid losing. It's playing to win, finding ways in the global marketplace to sell our products abroad or bring people from outside the U.S. in, which is what the travel industry was about.
Now, was this a hotel deal that you worked with him on?
Yes. Yeah.
And was it straightforward in the end? Did everybody win, or could there only be, is it zero-sum with President Trump?
No, look, I think in any negotiation with anybody, you try to find out what the other party really wants, and you try to make sure that what you really need gets out of a negotiation, too. And I think, look, there are different styles for negotiating. My style isn't his. But what he does is he makes it very clear what he's trying to get out of the negotiation, which, in a simple sense, makes it easier to make sure that you can give him that if there's something else that you need.
And everybody won.
In the end, everybody wins.
All right. Now, you spent a lot of time in China. We are really at the cusp of what could be the great middle classization, which we talk about in your book. And it's just amazing how important this long-term trend is. Can you sweep that away? Can you, if you're the president, just choose to not engage, or must you engage? And this is just posturing by our current president to be able to make it so there's better deals down the road.
I think it's about better deals down the road.
Really?
The reality is this, right? One of the things I talk about in the book is focus on the trend lines, ignore the headlines, right?
Yes.
The headlines today are all about protectionism and anti-globalization, but the trend line is global growth, right? 80% of global growth coming out of the crisis was in emerging markets.
Right.
About that same percentage of Starwood's growth was outside of the U.S. Even me, I had a book out for now a week. I've sold it in 20 countries. There's a startup I'm advising. Their first 20 customers, 12 of them were outside of the U.S., right? So for global companies and American companies to compete, they have to look at the total marketplace. The middle-class consumer around the world will be a much bigger marketplace than just the U.S. market.
Okay, now, Frits, one of the chapters that I like so much, you are a brand guy. I mentioned that in the introduction. But brands have a different sort of relevance these days, particularly with social media. Coors is a great brand. I was drinking Coors when I was watching the games last night. I've stayed at your hotels. I mean, there isn't any brand. Nike, I wear Nikes. They stay relevant? Can they stay relevant?
Absolutely. Look, it's really interesting to watch the interplay of technology and social change in brands. And the big thing for brands today is personalization. It's giving every individual consumer what they want, knowing where they are, how they like to consume. And brands that get that will stay relevant in this new marketplace.
Well, that means Nike could be good because they've really worked hard on personalization, even though the stock's been in a tough spot.
And you know, the thing with Nike is they do a great job also of getting feedback from consumers. I mean,
Yes.
Nike was never a big market research company.
Right.
They always had the idea, look, we know probably better than consumers what they want, but they're getting very good at being attentive through digital networks and through influencers to find out what people want and give it to them.
How I see that this by Tim Cook on the board of Nike. So these are companies that Steve Jobs certainly would understand. That's Frits Van Paasschen. The book is Disruptor's Feast. He's the former CEO of Starwood Hotels and Resorts. Look, I don't have authors on. Why? Because I tend not to learn as much as I can. But this is not a waste of time. This is a must-read. Mad Money's back after the break. Booyah! Jim Cramer here from Mad Money. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube. Click here to subscribe and get the jump on my exclusives with CEOs, plus market news, investing advice, and a whole lot more.